Hey everyone, and welcome back. Before we begin tonight's video, I need to give you a serious warning. What you're about to hear comes from healthcare professionals who have dedicated their lives to saving others. These aren't fictional tales or urban legends. These are real experiences from real medical workers during their night shifts. Hospitals at night are different places. The lights are dimmed, the hallways echo, and there's a thin line between life and death that becomes much more apparent when the world outside goes quiet. For the nurses, doctors, and support staff who work these shifts, that line sometimes blurs in ways they never expected. The 4 stories I'm sharing tonight come from medical professionals across different hospitals, different states, but they all share one thing in common. They experienced something during their night shift that they still can't explain. These healthcare workers reached out to me not for attention, but because they needed someone to believe them. They needed to share what they witnessed in places where death and healing exist side by side. So dim the lights, and prepare yourself for 4 true horror stories from hospital night shifts. This first story comes from Linda, an ICU nurse with 15 years of experience at a major teaching hospital in Chicago. Linda has seen everything you'd expect in intensive care. She's comfortable with death, familiar with loss, and trained to handle medical emergencies that would traumatize most people. But what happened to her during a shift last October still gives her nightmares. Linda was working the overnight shift in the ICU, which runs from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. The unit had 24 beds, but that night only 18 were occupied. Room 237, at the end of the east hallway, had been empty for 3 days following the death of an elderly patient named Mr. Chun. Mr. Chun had been Linda's patient during his final weeks. He'd been in the ICU for 2 months following complications from surgery, and over that time, Linda had grown attached to him. He was kind, grateful for every small comfort, and even in his weakened state, he always asked about Linda's family and remembered details from their conversations. When Mr. Chun passed away, Linda took it harder than she usually did. She'd been his primary nurse, and his family had specifically thanked her for making his final days as comfortable as possible. Room 237 had been deep cleaned and was ready for a new patient, but the bed assignments hadn't filled it yet. Hospital policy required that empty rooms be checked every 2 hours during night shifts, so at midnight, Linda made her routine walk down the east hallway. As she approached room 237, she noticed the heart monitor was on. This was odd because all equipment is powered down and unplugged when rooms are empty. Linda assumed housekeeping had forgotten to turn it off during cleaning, so she entered the room to switch it off. But when she looked at the monitor, it was displaying a steady heart rhythm. Not the flat line you'd expect from a disconnected machine, but the regular rhythm of someone sleeping peacefully. Linda checked the leads. They weren't connected to anything. The monitor was receiving a signal, but there was no source. She unplugged the machine from the wall. The rhythm continued, powered by the backup battery that shouldn't have been active. Linda stood there staring at the monitor, watching the steady heartbeat pattern that looked exactly like Mr. Chin's normal sleeping rhythm from the weeks she'd cared for him. Then the call light above the bed turned on. In an empty room, with no patient, the call light was requesting a nurse. Linda's training kicked in. She pressed the call button to respond and said, "This is Linda. How can I help you?" Silence. She tried again. "Hello? This is your nurse. Did you press the call button?" Then, through the intercom, she heard a voice she recognized. Weak, but unmistakably Mr. Chin's voice. "Linda, could you please turn down the lights? They're too bright." Linda felt her blood go cold. She looked around the room. Only the standard overnight lighting was on, the same dim level maintained in all empty rooms. "Mr. Chun," she whispered, "thank you for taking such good care of me." The voice continued through the intercom. "I wanted to make sure you knew. I'm comfortable now. The pain is gone." Linda ran from the room and immediately called security. When the security officer arrived, the heart monitor was off, unplugged, with a dead battery. The call light was inactive. The intercom showed no record of recent communication. But Linda wasn't finished with room 237. 2 days later, the room was assigned to a new patient, a middle-aged woman recovering from a stroke. Linda wasn't assigned to that room, but around 2 a.m., she saw the call light for 237 activate. The nurse assigned to that room was busy with another patient, so Linda responded. When she entered the room, the stroke patient was sleeping peacefully, but the woman's daughter, who had been dozing in the bedside chair, was wide awake and looked terrified. "Did you hear that?" the daughter whispered to Linda. "Hear what?" "Someone was talking to my mother." A man's voice. He was telling her that the nurses here are wonderful, that they'll take good care of her. But there's no one else in the room. Linda felt chills run down her spine. What did the voice sound like? Older, kind. He had a slight accent. Chinese, maybe? He kept saying Linda will take good care of you. Linda is the best nurse here. Linda had never introduced herself to this patient or her family. Her name wasn't on the door or visible anywhere in the room. Over the following months, Linda heard similar reports from families of patients assigned to room 237. A kind, elderly man's voice offering comfort and reassuring them about the quality of care they would receive. Always mentioning Linda specifically, always describing her as the best nurse in the unit. Linda requested to never be assigned to room 237 again, but she still passes by it during her rounds. Sometimes, late at night, she sees the heart monitor displaying that familiar rhythm, even when it's unplugged. And sometimes, when new patients arrive scared and alone, their families report that a gentle voice told them not to worry because Linda would take excellent care of them. Linda sent me copies of the incident reports she filed, along with statements from family members who heard the voice. She also included Mr. Chen's medical records showing his heart rhythm patterns, which exactly match what she observed on that monitor. Some patients, it seems, never really leave the ICU. This next story comes from Marcus, who worked as a night orderly at a regional medical center in Pennsylvania. Marcus's job involved transporting patients, moving equipment, and handling various tasks that kept the hospital running during overnight hours. The medical center was a 7-story building, with patient floors on levels 2 through 6. The basement housed the morgue, storage, and mechanical systems. The 7th floor was administrative offices, mostly empty at night. Marcus had been working nights for about 8 months when he started noticing something odd about elevator number 3. The hospital had 4 elevators, but elevator 3 had developed a peculiar habit. During night shifts, it would frequently stop at the 7th floor on its own, despite no one calling for it. The doors would remain open for exactly 30 seconds, then close and return to whatever floor it had been summoned to. Marcus initially assumed it was a mechanical issue and reported it to maintenance several times. The technicians could never find anything wrong with it. The elevator functioned perfectly during the day. The problem only occurred during night shifts, typically between midnight and 4 a.m. After a few weeks of this, Marcus started paying closer attention to elevator 3's behavior. He noticed that it didn't stop at the 7th floor randomly. It only happened when the elevator was transporting patients who had died during the night shift. When Marcus was moving a deceased patient from a room to the morgue, elevator 3 would make its unauthorized stop at the 7th floor. When he was transporting living patients or equipment, the elevator functioned normally. Marcus mentioned this to other night staff, and several nurses confirmed they'd noticed the same pattern. But everyone just wrote it off as a coincidence or a quirky mechanical issue. That changed on a Thursday night in February. Marcus was transporting Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly patient who had passed away from complications following heart surgery. As usual, when he pressed the basement button to take her to the morgue, the elevator stopped at the 7th floor. But this time, when the doors opened, Marcus saw someone standing in the hallway. It was an elderly man in a hospital gown, standing with his back to the elevator. Marcus called out, "Sir, are you okay? You shouldn't be up here at night." The man turned around, and Marcus immediately recognized him. It was Mr. Patterson, a patient who had died 3 weeks earlier. Marcus had transported Mr. Patterson's body to the morgue himself. Mr. Patterson looked exactly as he had in life, but there was something different about his appearance. He seemed clearer somehow, more present than the frail, sick man Marcus remembered from his final days. "Thank you for being so gentle with us," Mr. Patterson said. "We appreciate the dignity you show." Marcus stood frozen in the elevator, unsure if he was hallucinating or having some kind of breakdown. But Mrs. Rodriguez's body was right there beside him, and this was definitely happening. Marcus managed to ask. Mr. Patterson smiled and gestured down the hallway. For the first time, Marcus looked beyond Mr. Patterson and saw others. Dozens of people in hospital gowns, all ages, all standing peacefully in the 7th floor hallway. Marcus recognized several faces, patients he had transported to the morgue over the previous months. "We wait here," Mr. Patterson explained. "Before we move on, it's peaceful on the 7th floor, quiet, and we wanted to thank the people who cared for us." The elevator doors began to close. Marcus reached for the button to hold them open, but Mr. Patterson held up his hand. "Take care of Mrs. Rodriguez," he said. "She's ready to join us now. And Marcus, thank you for treating us like people, not just bodies. That means more than you know." The doors closed, and the elevator continued to the basement. Marcus completed his task in the morgue, but he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. When he returned upstairs, he immediately took elevator 3 to the 7th floor to investigate. The hallway was empty and dark, but it didn't feel empty, if that makes sense. It felt inhabited. Marcus started asking other night staff about the 7th floor. What he learned made his experience even more unsettling. The 7th floor had originally been patient rooms when the hospital first opened in 1965. But in 1978, following a series of unexplained deaths and patients' complaints about disturbing presences, the entire floor was converted to administrative use. The deaths had all occurred in room 717, always during night shifts, always involving patients who were expected to recover. No medical explanation was ever found for these deaths, but they stopped completely once patient care was moved away from the 7th floor. Room 717 was now used for storage, but Marcus learned from security that the motion sensors in that room activated frequently during night shifts, despite no one having access to it. Marcus continued working at the hospital for 6 more months after his encounter. Elevator 3 continued its pattern of stopping at the 7th floor when transporting deceased patients. But Marcus never saw Mr. Patterson or the others again. However, he did notice something else. Family members of patients who had passed away sometimes reported dreams or brief visitations from their loved ones. In these encounters, the deceased person always mentioned being in a peaceful place in the hospital, waiting with others who had been well cared for. They specifically mentioned a kind, orderly named Marcus who had treated them with respect and dignity. Marcus eventually left the hospital to work in a different field, but he sent me documentation of the elevator maintenance records, showing the repeated reports of mechanical issues that were never resolved. He also provided copies of the historical records about the 7th floor's conversion and the unexplained deaths in room 717. Sometimes, it seems, the boundary between life and death isn't as clear as we'd like to believe. And sometimes, those who have crossed that boundary want to express their gratitude to those who showed them kindness in their final moments. This third story is the hardest one for me to share, and I'll warn you now that it involves children. If you're sensitive to content involving pediatric patients, you may want to skip ahead to the final story. This comes from Jennifer, a pediatric nurse who worked at a children's hospital in Denver. Jennifer had been working in pediatric care for 12 years, specializing in critical care for seriously ill children. It's one of the most emotionally demanding jobs in healthcare, and Jennifer was exceptionally good at it. The children's hospital where Jennifer worked had a special ward for terminally ill patients, children who were receiving palliative care rather than curative treatment. This ward was designed to be as comfortable and home-like as possible, with family sleeping areas, play spaces, and a staff trained specifically in end-of-life care for children. Jennifer often worked the night shift in this ward, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Night shifts in pediatric palliative care are unique. They're quieter, more peaceful, but also heavy with the weight of families spending what might be their final nights with their children. In the spring of last year, Jennifer was caring for a 7-year-old boy named Tommy who was in the final stages of leukemia. Tommy had been in the hospital for several weeks, and Jennifer had become very attached to him. He was brave, funny, and despite his illness, he always tried to cheer up the other children in the ward. Tommy's room was at the end of the hall, room 314. Across the hall in room 313 was Emma, a 5-year-old girl with a rare genetic condition. The two children had become friends, and their families had grown close during their parallel journeys. On a Tuesday night in April, Tommy passed away peacefully in his sleep around 2:30 a.m. His family was with him, and Jennifer was there to help them through those final moments. It was heartbreaking, but as peaceful as such a situation could be. After Tommy's family had time to say their goodbyes, Jennifer followed protocol for pediatric deaths. She called the attending physician, contacted the necessary departments, and began the process of preparing Tommy's body with the dignity and care that children deserve. But around 4 a.m., something unusual happened. Emma, in room 313, woke up and began asking for Tommy. Emma's condition affected her mobility. She couldn't walk and rarely left her bed, but she was cognitively sharp and very aware of what was happening around her. "Where's Tommy?" she asked Jennifer. "I heard him calling my name." Jennifer knelt beside Emma's bed. She had planned to tell Emma about Tommy's passing in the morning, with the help of the child psychologist who specialized in helping children understand death. "Tommy is sleeping, sweetie," Jennifer said gently. "No, he's not sleeping," Emma insisted. "He came to my room. He told me he's not sick anymore, and that he's going to wait for me in the playroom. He said when I'm not sick anymore, we can play together all the time." Jennifer felt a chill. The playroom was at the other end of the ward, past Tommy's room. There was no way Emma could have known Tommy had passed away. The families and staff had been very quiet, and Emma's parents were asleep in her room. "Emma, honey, what exactly did Tommy tell you?" "He said the playroom is different now. There are lots of kids there, and they're all healthy and happy. He said there's a lady there who takes care of everyone, and she has the most beautiful smile." Emma paused, looking toward her door as if she could see something in the hallway. "He also said to tell you thank you for being so nice to all of us. He said you make the scary parts not so scary." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. These were not the words of a 5-year-old trying to process loss. Emma was describing something she believed she had actually experienced. Over the following nights, Emma continued to mention visits from Tommy, but she wasn't the only one. Other children in the ward began reporting similar experiences. Kids who had been patients there for weeks or months started talking about friends they were playing with, children that the staff recognized as former patients who had passed away. The descriptions were always the same. The children were healthy and happy. They were playing in a special version of the playroom that was brighter and more wonderful than the real one, and there was a kind woman watching over all of them. Jennifer started paying closer attention to these reports. She documented what the children told her and compared their descriptions. The consistency was remarkable. They all described the same woman, middle-aged, with graying hair and a warm smile, wearing a white dress rather than medical scrubs. None of the current patients had ever met this woman, but their descriptions were identical. Jennifer researched the hospital's history and made a discovery that gave her chills. From 1987 to 2003, the pediatric palliative care ward had been overseen by a nurse named Margaret Sullivan. Nurse Sullivan was legendary among the staff. She had dedicated her entire career to caring for terminally ill children and was beloved by patients and families alike. Margaret Sullivan had died suddenly in 2003 of a heart attack, while working a night shift in the same ward where Jennifer now worked. She was found at her desk in the morning, and according to the reports, she appeared peaceful, as if she had simply gone to sleep. Jennifer found photographs of Margaret Sullivan in the hospital's archives. When she showed them to Emma and several other children, Without identifying who the woman was, they immediately recognized her. "That's the lady in the playroom," Emma said excitedly. "She's the one who takes care of everyone. She told Tommy and me that she's been waiting to meet us." Emma passed away peacefully 2 weeks later, with her family at her side. Her last words were about going to play with Tommy in the special playroom where no one is sick anymore. Jennifer no longer works night shifts in the pediatric ward, but she keeps in touch with colleagues who do. The reports continue. Children continue to describe visits from former patients, and they all mention the kind woman who watches over them. Jennifer provided me with copies of Margaret Sullivan's employment records, photographs, and documentation of the children's statements. She also included testimonies from other staff members who have witnessed these phenomena. In a place where families face the unthinkable loss of a child, perhaps it's not surprising that love transcends death. Perhaps children, in their innocence, can perceive comfort that adults have learned to doubt. Or perhaps Margaret Sullivan, who dedicated her life to caring for sick children, simply couldn't bear to leave them, even in death. This final story comes from Dr. Sarah Kim, an emergency room physician at a trauma center in Atlanta. Dr. Kim has been working in emergency medicine for 8 years, and she's accustomed to high-stress situations, life-or-death decisions, and the adrenaline-fueled environment of a busy ER. But what she experienced during a particularly intense night shift last summer challenged everything she thought she knew about life and death. It was a Saturday night in July, the kind of night that ER staff dread: hot weather, full moon, and a steady stream of trauma cases. Dr. Kim was working a 12-hour shift that started at 7 p.m., and by midnight, the ER was at capacity with multiple critical patients. Around 1:30 a.m., paramedics brought in a young man named David who had been in a severe motorcycle accident. David was unconscious, with multiple traumatic injuries, including a serious head trauma. The paramedics had managed to stabilize him enough for transport, but his condition was critical. Dr. Kim was the attending physician for David's case. As the trauma team worked to assess and treat his injuries, it became clear that David's situation was extremely grave. His brain scans showed massive swelling, and despite their best efforts, his vital signs were deteriorating rapidly. David's girlfriend, Maria, had arrived at the hospital and was waiting in the family conference room. She was distraught, as any loved one would be, but she kept insisting that she needed to see David immediately. "He's trying to tell me something," she told Dr. Kim. "I can hear him calling my name. Please, I need to see him." Hospital policy typically limits family access during active trauma treatment, but Dr. Kim could see that Maria was genuinely distressed in a way that went beyond normal worry. Against protocol, she allowed Maria to briefly visit David in the trauma bay. What happened next still gives Dr. Kim chills. As soon as Maria entered the trauma bay, she walked directly to David's bedside and began speaking to him as if he was conscious and responding, even though he was on life support and showing no signs of awareness. "I know you're scared," Maria said to David, "but you need to make a choice. You can stay, but it's going to be really hard. Or you can go, and I'll understand." Maria paused, as if listening to a response that no one else could hear. "I see him too," she continued. "Your dad is here. He's been waiting for you." Dr. Kim felt confused. According to the information they'd received, David's father had died 5 years earlier in military service overseas. Maria had never mentioned seeing anyone else in the room. But then Dr. Kim noticed something that made her question her own sanity. In the corner of the trauma bay, barely visible in her peripheral vision, there was a shadow that didn't belong to any person or equipment in the room. It was human-shaped, tall, and seemed to be standing at attention in a military posture. When Dr. Kim looked directly at the corner, she saw nothing. But when she focused on David and Maria, the shadow was clearly visible in the edge of her vision. Maria continued her one-sided conversation with David for several more minutes. Finally, she kissed his forehead and whispered, "It's okay. I love you. Go with your dad." At that exact moment, David's heart monitor showed a brief, unusual pattern. Not the erratic rhythm of a failing heart, but 3 distinct, strong beats, almost like a signal. Then his vital signs began to fail rapidly. Dr. Kim and her team worked desperately to save David's life, but it was clear that he was slipping away. As they prepared for the inevitable, Dr. Kim noticed that the shadow in the corner had moved closer to David's bedside. David passed away at 2:47 a.m. As Dr. Kim was completing the necessary procedures and preparing to speak with Maria about next steps, something unprecedented happened. The trauma bay's automatic doors, which required either a key card or a pressure plate to operate, opened on their own. No one was near them, and the pressure plates showed no activation. The doors remained open for exactly 30 seconds, long enough for 2 people to walk through, then closed automatically. Dr. Kim immediately checked with security about the door malfunction. The electronic logs showed no key card access, no pressure plate activation, and no mechanical failure. The doors had simply opened and closed on their own. But Maria saw something that Dr. Kim couldn't. "They're leaving together," Maria told her, looking toward the doors. David and his father. His dad finally got to meet him. Over the following weeks, Dr. Kim couldn't stop thinking about what she'd witnessed. She reviewed David's medical records and discovered details that Maria couldn't have known. David's father, Sergeant Michael Torres, had died in Afghanistan when David was 17. According to military records, Sergeant Torres had been awarded a Bronze Star for staying with wounded soldiers under enemy fire, refusing to leave them behind even when ordered to retreat. He had died while protecting others, just as he seemed to be protecting his son during David's final moments. Dr. Kim also learned that the trauma bay where David had been treated was the same room where Sergeant Torres had been brought 5 years earlier when his body was returned from overseas. The family had been allowed a brief private viewing before the funeral home took custody. But the most unsettling discovery came when Dr. Kim reviewed the security footage from that night. The cameras clearly showed the automatic doors opening and closing with no visible cause. But in the split second before the doors opened, there appeared to be 2 translucent figures near David's bedside. One shorter figure that seemed to be supported by a taller figure in what looked like military fatigues. The image was brief and unclear, but it was definitely there on the recording. Dr. Kim provided me with copies of the security footage, the door access logs, David's medical records, and military records for Sergeant Torres. She also included statements from other staff members who witnessed the unexplained door activation. In the emergency room, doctors fight death every day. They see miracles and tragedies in equal measure. But sometimes, Dr. Kim learned, death isn't the enemy. Sometimes it's a reunion. And sometimes, love transcends even the finality of death, ensuring that no one has to face the unknown alone. Those 4 stories from hospital night shifts, they represent something I've noticed in many of the submissions I receive. There's something different about places where life and death intersect regularly. Hospitals, in particular, seem to be locations where the boundaries between worlds become thinner. What makes these stories especially compelling to me is the common thread running through them. In each case, the supernatural encounters weren't frightening or malevolent. They were comforting. Mr. Chun thanking Linda for her care. Mr. Patterson expressing gratitude to Marcus. Tommy and Margaret Sullivan watching over sick children. Sergeant Torres coming for his son. These healthcare workers didn't experience horror. They experienced something that challenged their understanding of reality, but ultimately affirmed the power of human compassion and connection. Linda, Marcus, Jennifer, and Dr. Kim all provided extensive documentation for their experiences. Medical records, security footage, employment histories, incident reports. I verified what I could, and the evidence is remarkably consistent. But beyond the evidence, what strikes me most about these stories is what they say about the people who work in healthcare. These professionals dedicate their lives to caring for others, often in the most difficult circumstances imaginable. They provide comfort, dignity, and compassion to people in their most vulnerable moments. Perhaps it shouldn't surprise us that this kindness creates connections that transcend death itself. To the healthcare workers watching this, thank you for what you do. Your compassion doesn't go unnoticed, even by those who can no longer express their gratitude in conventional ways. If you work in healthcare and have experienced something unexplainable during your night shifts, I'd be honored to hear your story. But remember, I only share accounts from people who are comfortable with their experiences being told respectfully and authentically. Take care of yourselves, appreciate the people who care for you when you're vulnerable, and remember that sometimes the most profound experiences happen in the quiet hours when the rest of the world is asleep. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. You like 4 Story to subscribe the channel.